Peace FM 104.3. Good to meet.
But from what you're saying, Prof, we earn more than we spend more than we earn. So, would we ever get out of this?
As a country, we have to decide. Because as you can see, over the years, and when you look at the data, you will see that 1965, when Dr. Kwame Nkrumah first made an application to the IMF for a fund-supported program, the reasons he listed are not different from the reasons that have taken us to the IMF for our 17th IMF-supported program pending.
So we've been at the same place since independence?
It's the same thing.
Isn't that scary?
The same. Balloon public debt, call that one debt unsustainability, exchange rate losses, inflation. Inflation in 1964 was 0.98%, less than 1%.
I see.
By the end of 1965, you know what? Inflation had gone up to 26.4%.
Wow.
As we speak today, officially, inflation is more than 40%. But unofficially, it could be more than that. Okay? Now, in an environment where you have weak fiscal regime, when we say weak fiscal regime, we can talk about high expenditure or expenditure rigidity, low revenue mobilization, which is then explained through borrowing. So we say in economics, weak fiscal regime together with elevated public debt makes it difficult for central banks to contain inflation under inflation targeting framework. And that is why you see Bank of Ghana struggling to contain inflation. Okay, from the beginning of this year, Bank of Ghana has increased the policy rate by more than 1,000 basis points. And yet inflation is rising. Okay, and inflation is broadening. In fact, it has actually broadened across food and non-food inflation. What that means is that inflationary pressures are becoming entrenched, therefore undermining the credibility built around Bank of Ghana's short-term price stability objective. I'll give you an example. When you go to Bank of Ghana website, their medium-term inflation target is 8% with a symmetrical rate of 2%. Symmetrical means that plus or minus 2%.
Okay.
But what is inflation today?
42 or thereabouts.
Okay. What does that mean to the market in terms of the credibility Bank of Ghana has in the market? So that when Bank of Ghana says X, people won't take it to mean X bar. This is what we are talking about. Okay. And then the issue is that under inflation targeting, one key requirement for that to be effective in bringing down inflation and engineer growth because of the trade-off that has to be managed, you need fiscal discipline, which comes from the politicians. So what we have done, in fact, under this current inflation framework, which unofficially started from March 2002 and officially 2007, is that we use monetary policy as a broom to sweep the mess that is created by the fiscal side. A good example of that is to see where Bank of Ghana Act says that deficit monetizing, in other words, financing the budget deficit by the central bank, essentially lending to Ghana government. In other words, it's nothing but the same thing as saying that printing money, because Bank of Ghana doesn't take deposits in order to lend. The law capped it at 5%. The Bank of Ghana now is doing more than that. The reason is that the government, the country has been priced out of the Eurobond market. Now, in the medium to the long-term market, in the domestic market, where the government has been priced out. So the government is doing heavily short-term borrowing, treasury bill based, with rollover risk. So when it happens that way, Bank of Ghana, against all that they know and they can do and they have to do, would have to manage a critical trade-off of either allowing the government to collapse or they have to put the government on its balance sheet by financing the deficit.
So we are hanging on a thread at this point.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned COVID, you mentioned Russia, Ukraine, you mentioned the Gettysburg economy, and how we've gotten here. We are spending more than we earn, the level of mismanagement as well.
Yeah.
And as we sit today, there's a new budget for 2023. There are new taxes and everything else in between. From your professional point of view, would this help in any way, the new budget?
So this is how I look at it. It is necessary if we want to come out of this mess, but it's actually not adequate.
Then it means it's going to get worse.
Yes, in fact, we are looking at it in the next 3 to 4 years. But you can shorten it depending on the measures we take now. That's how we do projections.
But Prof, if you say it is necessary but not adequate, can you explain a bit to those of us who are the uninitiated?
Yes. So we expect fiscal consolidation. In other words, revenue enhancement, expenditure restraint or rationalization. All right. So since 2020, in fact, 2023 budget is the first level appreciation of the reality on the ground. In other words, we looking at it from afar, sitting out somewhere, we are looking at it that government is now waking up to the reality on the ground and the mess that has been created that needed to be dealt with. So you see the 2023 budget, unlike the 2022 and before, now mirroring a certain reality. Now, the reason we are a bit sad is that this should have been done long ago. In fact, towards the end of 2021, the signs were clear because in the third quarter, the Ministry of Finance was in the market trying to borrow, but the market actually rejected them.
Why?
Because the numbers, yes, because the fundamentals were deteriorating. So that was the clearest warning to government that things were getting out of hand. But like we played it down. And now, so when the 2022 budget failed to mirror that reality, the market then punished us. And that's why we said that the 2022 budget did not give greater assurance to investors in terms of a fiscal sustainability path. When it happens that way, they exit. The market reads. It's just like this song. Like God knows what will happen in the future, and He does it today, right? The market plays an important role of price discovery. Okay, let me give you an example. Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
You know, we've been talking about debt restructuring, the possibility of haircuts.
Yes.
And then government has been denying all this work. Now, the market knows what will happen. And they've started pricing that in today's instrument. So if you went to your bank or non-bank financial institution today to go and withdraw your money, okay, they are already pricing that haircut into it.
I see.
And they are discounting it. They can call it mark to market, but the baseline interpretation is realized investor losses, and that is nothing but a haircut on the investor. Okay. So now let's come to home. We have to come out of this. And to come out of this, it will require some painful fiscal adjustments.
Fiscal adjustments.
Yeah. The first level is what we have seen in the 2023 budget. Yet with that, if you look at the totality of it, the revenue measures and the expenditure measures, as we say, is not adequate.
Because we're still going to spend more than we earn.
Yes. And the level of fiscal adjustment we need to do in order to take us of this, we have not. So the 2023 budget does not measure up to that level. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Baseline, if your debt is unsustainable and you want to crawl back to a sustainable level from where we are now, some of the things I'll say are a bit technical, but I'll try and be moderate. So there are certain indicators that we use to judge whether your debt is unsustainable. Baseline and a more conservative measure is what we call debt to GDP ratio. It doesn't tell everything, but it's baseline. Great. We are trending around 30% in excess of the policy dependency threshold at the baseline estimation. What we are saying is that if your debt carrying capacity, right, is supposed to be less, is judged to be at 70% of GDP, and you are doing in excess of 80% or 100%, means that you are above that policy dependency threshold. Is that okay? Then you have to go, that's not the only indicator. There are other indicators like debt service to revenue ratio. So those indicators, they are broken down into two: solvency, liquidity. Liquidity measures the immediate, short term. And then the solvency looks at the medium to the long term, many years to come, and all of that. So they do it over a certain horizon. Okay, great. Now, because we are trending, for almost all of them, we are trending above the policy dependency threshold, especially when it comes to the liquidity ratios. It's very harsh where we are, and the disparity between where we are and where the policy dependency threshold is, where we must operate below, is very wide. Now, to close that will mean a certain painful fiscal adjustment. Now, if we resolve all of this through fiscal adjustment alone, this country will collapse. We can't bear it. We can't bear it. And
so it means, Prof, we are trending for the wrong reasons.
Yes.
And
that is why.
Please finish.
And that is why we quickly came to the conclusion that where we are, fiscal adjustment alone, in other words, trying to solve this crisis through revenue and expenditure management alone will not be enough.
So the new taxes will not be enough.
Yes, and therefore a debt treatment or debt operation, call it debt exchange, call it whatever you want to call it, baseline restructuring with possible haircuts, almost a given, would have to be done. Now, the way you judge that is that to crawl back to where you are, your primary balance on positive basis should not be less than 8%. Now, if you check the 2023 budget, government primary balance at positive level is 0.7% of GDP. So 0.7%, and where you are supposed to be, that gap means that has to be closed through other measures, which would include debt operation, debt restructuring, or something.
Peace FM 104.3. Good to meet you.